Hello, friends. Thanks for joining us tonight for another D8 Virtual Youth Workshop. We've been gone for a few weeks, but we're back now. I am Terry Fender, your District 8 Director. We're going to have a really nice presentation tonight. But first, I would like to remind everybody to please feel free to chime in throughout the presentation, where you're located, state, city, province. We're always glad to hear from y'all where you're at. Also, any questions you might have, please feel free to chime in with those, and Amanda at the Control Center will read those off to our speaker later on. With that, I'm happy to introduce Judge Corey Hayes of New York, speaking on English spots. Corey, take it away, my friend.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks Terry and Amanda for asking me to be part of this workshop in the series. I'm at my home here in New York, where I no longer raise English spots, but we're going to talk about them because they're a breed that I've had for many, many years. So I've sent Amanda a PowerPoint. I think she's going to share it here for us. I'm a professor here at a college in New York State, so PowerPoints are how I deliver a lot of my learning methods. So I think Amanda's going to share it, and then we will talk about them a little bit. So just a little background on myself. I grew up in northern New York, Canton, raised rabbits since I was about, I guess I got my first rabbit when I was 4, had them for almost 30 years now. English spots are very near and dear breed to my heart. I've had them for the longest. I got them as a youth kid when I was about 10 years old, and I recently just got out of them a couple of years ago. So it's a breed that I'm really passionate about. I've watched its popularity spike quite a bit in the ARBA over the last 10 to 20 years. When I was a kid, spots were not that popular, especially among the youth, but now they seem to be taking the ARBA by storm. So we're going to go over the standard a little bit. We're going to talk about a little bit about each of the markings and their type and whatnot, and how I evaluate them, and how I look at the rabbits from a judge's standpoint, and then also from a breeding standpoint, because I think the breed can be intimidating for both judges and breeders or potential new breeders, because they are a marked breed, and not only are they marked, but they're also an arch breed, so therefore it just takes a little bit more time to evaluate them and go over them. So we're gonna go through that. I'm gonna give you perspective from both sides, and then go from there. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask Terry or Amanda. They can get the question to me, and I'd be happy to answer them. So let's see. Let's go to the first slide, Amanda, if you can. There we go. So kind of the first thing that I think the elephant in the room in regards to looking at them is the body type of the animal, right? And so the English spot is considered a full arch breed. And with that being said, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. They're not a rabbit that you just set on the table and kind of scrunch up and evaluate their type. They're an animal that you need to kind of step back and look at them for a type perspective and also a breeding perspective. And so in this situation, right, we're talking about a full arch, and we'll have pictures of this. And if you can kind of see in the background of the PowerPoint, I have a picture of one of my favorite does that I raised throughout my time with spots, but we'll talk about that in regards to their presentation. But the arch should start at the nape of the neck and then continue in an unbroken line over the shoulders, loin, hips, and then rounding out at the tail. And that's something that, again, you need to kind of step back from the table and evaluate those animals and make sure that you're getting that arch appearance. There's a lot of rabbits that are out there that when they're moving, their arch presentation vanishes. They get really flat and what we call chopped or angulated in the hindquarters. And I think that's something that we need to, as breeders and judges, we need to make sure that we have a full understanding of how those animals are going to present themselves. And there are some different things that go into it. So they should show more depth of body when you're looking at that, right? And so in regards to their evaluation, when you're looking at full arched animals, one thing that I pay a lot of attention to is their overall structure, right? Their structure is what's making that arch appearance, and specifically looking at the structure of their front limb, their rib cage, their overall skeletal design when you're looking at these animals. So the side profile should taper in the hindquarters to the shoulders when you're looking at them. But I'll show you a couple examples of rabbits at the end that each one is kind of a case study in itself in regards to overall type, but we'll pick apart those rabbits a little bit more in regards to their general appearance and their overall structure. So we're going to go through these things just a little bit, but I think it's important that we talk about each one of the points of the standard and go from there. One thing they have to keep in mind is that these animals need to be evaluated naturally to evaluate their type and their markings, right? And so this definition is coming right from the ARCH definition in our standard. So we're talking specifically type here. We need to be able to evaluate them, so therefore we have to look at them at a natural standpoint. I'll talk about that in my processes in regards to litter evaluation, and then when I'm judging rabbits, when I have English spots on my table. So Amanda, if you go to the next slide. So just kind of going over the colors and the schedule of points, right? And I'll give you a little knowledge of what I used to raise. So we have blacks, we have blues, we have chocolates, golds, grays, lilacs, and tortoise. My specialty, or what I concentrated on, were kind of your blacks and chocolates. Chocolates, I guess, would be my biggest area of where I concentrated the most, where most of my big time winners came from. So I had a chocolate, black, blue, and lilac line, and then I had a black and gray line. If you want to get into the genetics of breeding and what to breed to who and how to breed things, we can do that at another time, but we're just going to talk about evaluating. But I think it's important that you make sure that you know what you're breeding to what in terms of color and what's behind those pedigrees from a genetic standpoint. When we're talking about schedule of points, this is where it gets a little crazy. Every judge has a different perspective or interpretation of the standard. Remember, there are 35 points on general type, right? And so a lot of those points are going to come from their body, which is 25 points, and therefore we have to think about what these animals are, and they're an arch breed, right? So we have to make sure that we have a full understanding of what an arch is and how it goes across. Feet and legs, I'll talk about that quite a bit. Your feet and legs are going to help present that body type in a proper manner. There's a lot of weak ankles out there. There's a lot of poor structured front ends on rabbits that I've seen throughout my time judging. That's something I was extremely critical of in my rabbits when we were evaluating them. I wanted them to be sound structurally in order for them to carry that type properly, and then we painted them essentially with markings, not literally, but figuratively in regards to how they went. So I was a type person always. I always selected my young juniors for type. And you'll see, you know, I'll have some examples of them here shortly, but I would probably discount some markings and keep a typed rabbit beforehand. Fur is 8 points, so that's something that, you know, when you come down to making your selections, you know, as a judging standpoint, you have to evaluate that fur. Fur is still 8 points, and if they don't have good quality fur. Color as well. I didn't put the definitions of the colors on here, but please refer to the standard, if you will, in order to, you know, understand what they're looking at, but those colors are pretty straightforward and standard. The gray is maybe a little bit wishy-washy when it comes to that. Markings, I have those broken down to the next slide. As you can see, 44 points come from markings alone. But the way we get down to them is that we divide those markings up quite a bit. There's a lot of markings to consider when we're looking at this. It's hard sometimes to put all this in your brain and kind of figure it out, especially from a judge's standpoint. A lot of judges, friends of mine, maybe not now, but they used to be very intimidated by the spots and evaluating them because there's just so much going on. And they're a spirited breed, that's what I like to call them. So they can be a little overwhelming on the table in regards to trying to figure them out and sort them out. Like Avesing is one of my favorite judges of watching him evaluate spots. I've always had the honor of showing under him, and he takes him and I judge very similarly, have a very similar eye when we're looking at these rabbits, and so I always have a great time showing under Mike, and he's the one that I respect greatly in regards to his opinion on spots. So we'll talk about markings in a minute, and then conditions per the Arborist standard. That's something that you want to look at. Just to make sure. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the different markings that are there. So when we're looking at markings, it's again, can be a little overwhelming, and so we have to break it down. I always go from the nose to the tail, and that's how this standard goes for. So butterfly, that's their nose marking, and we'll talk about that, but essentially it's a butterfly or butterfly shape. Eye circles around their eyes should be uniform, and we'll go over each one of them here in a minute. Cheek spots, which we have, you know, we'll see in their uniformity. Ear markings, this is an interesting one of contention in regards to looking at how the ear markings present themselves, and something that we need to take into consideration. Herringbone or spine marking, there's 10 points. There's a lot of points dedicated, in my opinion, towards the herringbone, and therefore needs to be presented properly and make sure we have a full understanding of what a herringbone pattern looks like. It's not just a stripe, but that's something we need to take into consideration. Then side pattern and sweeps, how that side pattern and sweeps present themselves. It's funny, I'm watching my Facebook Live at the same time, and my rabbit partner that I used to raise spots with just joined to watch, so I'm a little intimidated to see if she corrects me in anything that I say. So side patterns and sweeps, and then graduation, which we'll talk about. And graduation is something that's hard for some people to understand, you know, how graduation works and how it moves down there. So we'll talk about each one of these briefly, and then we'll put some rabbits. Oh, and then balance, sorry, that's a really important thing, balance. And how they're balanced from side to side, and balance not only, I have it in the slideshow a little bit later, but balance side to side, but also balance from their head markings to their side markings. You can have them unbalanced there, and it can give a skewed presentation of the breed. So we'll go each, before we go into each marking, so how to handle and evaluate spots. And so I'm going to give you my point of view from both a breeder and a judge. I do them very similarly, but also I have a little bit different techniques when it comes into it. So, you know, from a breeding standpoint, you know, I think it's really important for us to make sure we have a full understanding of how these animals mature and how they grow, and then from a judge's perspective, make sure that we can get all of these things into one quick evaluation of the rabbit. And so there's a couple areas that I look at in order to understand them, and I have them highlighted here for you to view. And so the first one, right, when we talk about them being natural. And so a lot of people like to take rabbits out of the holding coops when they're judging them and just get their hands on them and evaluate them. Spots are a little bit different creatures. You need to give them time to feel comfortable on the table, to get up and show themselves off. There used to be an older judge, and I'm blanking on his name. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He used to call them table crawlers, you know, young juniors when they first get out there and they just crawl along the table. And you don't want that. You want them to feel safe and natural and get up and show themselves off. So that's something to keep in mind. You want to be comfortable, right? If you're intimidating them and putting your hands on them, those animals aren't going to move freely. They're not going to show themselves off. They're not going to get up off the table and show that full arch and show sunlight underneath. I always give them time. If there's a rabbit that you think looks really good on the table, or something that caught your eye in the nest box, but it's just a little scared, step back, let them feel comfortable on that. There was times when my rabbit partner and I would have 10 or 20 of them on the table, standing there watching them, and sometimes they play together and it shows themselves off a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying to do that as a judge. You shouldn't have that many rabbits on the table, but sometimes you just need to give them a little bit of time. Take them out, evaluate them, go over, check for DQs, look for, all the things you need to do, and then just let them on the table, step back, or go on to the next one and evaluate those rabbits, and just try and get them to be comfortable and give them time to settle into the table. So you want to make sure that you're taking into consideration cleanliness of the overall pattern and presentation, and then clarity of markings, and we'll talk about them here in a little bit for each one of them. But that's something that we really need to think about, is the clarity of those markings and how clean they are in regards to their presentation. And that all kind of ties into balance, how those markings balance up side to side, and how clean they are in their overall presentation. You'll hear the phrase feathered markings in English spots quite a bit, and we'll also have some rabbits here for you to look at that show some feathered markings. We talk about congestion or dirty-sided rabbits, and we will have those as well to look at. Then movement, I think, they're an arch breed. They're a full arch breed. They need to be evaluated on the move. And I think that if you, I don't know how many judges will say that they evaluate movement, but that's something I do from my knowledge in livestock and other things. But movement to me is really important. How the animal floats across the table, how it moves up and down the table, how those feet land on the table will kind of give you an overall picture on the skeletal structure of that animal and how it's going to present its body type. So movement is something that I have spent a lot of time looking at and evaluating quite a bit throughout my time in English spots. And so I guess we'll just kind of go through the markings. I didn't put the entire standard up there. If you are interested in learning more about them, by all means, get a hold of me, but I just put some highlighted things on here that I like to talk about and maybe some faults and things like that. So when we're talking about general head markings, a common thing that we'll have in a mark breed, and I guess even before we get to that, when you breed English spots, something to take into consideration is the percentage of animals that are showable or marked. You're going to have solid marked rabbits be born in the litter. You're going to have Charlies, which are animals that do not present a full pattern, that are very broken, and those animals cannot be shown. They're not eligible for showing. Then you're going to have your marked rabbit, right? And so your marked rabbits, you know, depending on the genetics in the litter or your odds, there's a variety of percentages that can be presented within them. There's a lot of science behind them. I know Mike Avesing posted the other day, he had a large litter and 100% marked. Now, just because they're 100% marked doesn't mean that they're 100% showable. And so that's something that can be discouraging for the breed as you're looking as a young or a new breeder is going through them. But head markings is one area where we see a lot of extra head spots, stray spots, and those are things that we have to take into consideration looking at them. So they can only have one stray head spot, and you know, preferably none. We want that head to be as clean as possible. One thing we'll talk about ear base. Their ear base isn't like a checker giant. Checker giants have such a, well, I would love them to be, but they're not always like that. You want it to be as clean as you can and fully colored all the way to the ear base, but oftentimes we have a little bit of, you know, dirtiness around that ear base, and that's something that we have to, you know, think about as we're going forward. The butterfly should be in the shape of butterfly. There's a lot of variations in that. So a fault with that would be irregular shape. So they should balance from side to side, even though it's on the front of the animal. Both sides of the cheeks should balance the presentation. Within that, you have a nose fork. Sometimes they're blunt, sometimes they're rigid, they're crooked, or things like that. Sometimes they're higher and sharper, but those things that you're going to have to kind of work out yourself in regards to your interpretation of the standard. I don't like them rounded, but I don't like them super pointy either. So those are things that you have to kind of, you know, figure out what you like and how it affects the overall general appearance of that animal. You know, so take some time to look at it. Eye circles are to be surrounded. Eyes are to be surrounded by an even color marking around their eyes. It should be fully encapsulated or encased with color. You know, and that's something that, you know, they should be alike and balanced from side to side, so they should match. One shouldn't be ragged and one shouldn't be clean, right? They should be on both sides. Again, you have to take it into perspective. If if they're even but ragged, is that better than one clean and one ragged? You know, those are things you have to take your interpretation of that. Perfection would be they'd be completely round and smooth, but oftentimes you'll see a feather coming off their eye. You know, that's something that I think a lot of people commonly associate with a spots is that they have a feather, but in reality, according to our standard, a perfect clean round circle around the eye is what we're striving for. Faults would be too large or uneven or drags coming off of that. You know, those are things that we have to think about. Going back up to the top, we can't have any head markings connecting each other. So an eye circle cannot connect to a cheek spot. If they do, that's a disqualification. They can't connect to a butterfly or up to the ear base, and those are things that we have to think about. And then obviously absence of an eye circle is a disqualification. Cheek spots, they should go below the eye, kind of the whisker base. They should be round, symmetrical, even side to side. Where we see faults in them is they're too big, they're unbalanced, you know, they're double or they're split, and those are things you have to look at. You know, if you really pay attention to them, because they can look like they're being presented as one, but if you really look into them, you know, there could be some split marks in there. One thing, you know, kind of looking at all this, and we'll talk about it a little bit more at the end, is overall balance, right? We've had rabbits that come out with these really big, bold, beautiful, like overwhelmingly large head markings, big eye circles, big round cheek spots, really big butterfly, super bold. And we've had rabbits come out with really refined head markings, very thin in overall appearance. And, you know, those are things that you're gonna have to figure out as a breeder, you know, how those will work into your programs. Casey and I spent a lot of time evaluating them. We probably argued over which rabbits to breed and which rabbits to keep and sell many times, but, you know, it was fun to have two perspectives when we're looking at these spots over the years to really kind of figure out which ones we like to keep and which ones we're going to the breeding program. Now, those big, heavy spotted ones were not ones that we would put on the show table, right? They were unbalanced in our opinion. Ear markings, they should be completely colored. We want them to be sharp at the ear base. We want that color to come right down to the base of the ear. That doesn't always happen, right? So we can fault them depending on where we're looking at their dirty ear base. And then white hairs running up the ears. You shouldn't disqualify white hairs running up, but if there's a white spots in the upper half of the ear, right, then that's a disqualification. So there's lots of things to look at, and we're only at the head so far in regards to marking. So it can be a lot to think about and a lot to kind of work yourself through in regards to looking at it, but it's something that with time you'll get better at, definitely. So, go back one. I think I must have missed putting transition in here, so sorry, this is a lot of information coming at you all at once. So herringbone of the spine marking, if you want to refer to the standard for just a little bit better interpretation of what a herringbone is, but the spine marking obviously runs from the nape of the neck all the way down in an unbroken line to the base of the tail. And one thing right off the bat that I always do is I always look at the intensity of that herringbone to the tip of the tail. Because oftentimes you'll kind of look at that tail, and at the base of the rabbit into the tail is where they start to fade out or get weak. So you'll see breaks behind the nape and the neck and then at their tail. And so I want that color to be as rich and solid and that marking to be as clear as day from the top all the way to the bottom. So I think that's something that you need to take into consideration. The presentation or pattern of a herringbone, right? You need to, that kind of rigid pattern of a herringbone starts out and then tapers out and then comes back in. And so, you'll see 100 different rabbits and they'll all have a different presentation of what a herringbone is, but you don't want it to be a solid stripe, right? There should be some definition of what a herringbone is. Side markings, again, these side markings, just like your cheek spots and your eye circles and your butterfly, they should match from side to side in their overall presentation. We talk about a couple things, right? So side pattern and sweeps. And so looking at the chain coming out of the shoulder down into the sweep and then over to the hip markings. And I'll show you here in just a minute. But we want to see uniformity from side to side and clarity of markings. We also want to see this concept called graduation. And that's something that's hard to take into to understand when we're looking at it. But basically what graduation is an increasing in the side, let's just say size of the spot, not side of the spot, excuse me, the size of the spots through the chain all the way to the base. And so they should start out relatively, I don't want to say tiny, but it should smaller and then gradually get bigger as they go through that sweep and then up onto the hip. And that's something that we see a lot, as breeders and as a judge. I see some rabbits being put up that are, maybe they lack graduation. And graduation is something that I think that we should be striving for. It kind of defines what a spot is when we're looking at it. And so we'll put some pictures up here in just a moment for you to, look at here, and we can talk about them. Obviously, you can ask questions about each one of them, but I will talk through each one of them and kind of give you my perspective of what I like and what I don't like about those rabbits. Balance, again, something to take into consideration. Side to side, they should be mirror image of one another. And so oftentimes, I just saw a question pop up on here while I'm watching out of the corner of my eye. One question was how recommendation for looking at juniors, and that a mirror is something that really helps you, and put a mirror on the length of the running table in your rabbit barn and let those rabbits run up and down, and so you can kind of see both sides at the same time. Obviously it's going to take some time to get used to, but it allows you to see the image of the other side while looking at the one closest to you, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. Belly spots are something that you need to look at. So 6 spots are they're either called belly spots or teeth spots. They can have them, they're desirable, but if not, it's not a DQ if they're absent. Leg spots, which we'll see some here, they're allowed to have them, but again, if they don't have them, it's fine. So that's kind of a really quick overview of what we're looking for in terms of the pattern. But I think it's better if we just show you some rabbits here to look at. And then we will talk about each one of them. And then if you have any questions, you can come back. So this is a buck from I don't know how many years ago it was, but this is a young junior buck, and there's some cool things about him, some things that I instantly don't like. The first thing that I get drawn to is the strength of his front ankle. And so that's me being super critical of the breed. But the strength of that front ankle, I want that rabbit to have a much stronger front end. In my opinion, he's kind of toeing out, if you will, and therefore he's being concaved in his chest floor. And you can almost see that. If you look at the point of the front elbow right behind it, he's a little narrow underneath there, and therefore he doesn't have the capacity in order to have that smoothness all the way throughout. However, I love his overall depth of body. This rabbit is super deep from his shoulder down to the base of the floor, and he carries a strong presentation of an arch all the way down to the base of the tail. I love where his head comes out of his shoulder, and I love the length of rear limb on this rabbit. So if you can see, he's up off the table, and he's not dragging his rear end on the ground. These rabbits are arch frees. They should show daylight. They should have length of rear limb, in my opinion. Not just the front limb, they need it on the rear as well in order to show proper type. In regards to his head, you can't see him, but if you look at the top of the rabbit's eye marking, that's the feather that I'm talking about. In reality, it should just, desirable should be just clean all the way around, but that feather is acceptable. Well, the way to make this a good rabbit is to have that same pattern on the other side. You can't see his nose marking or his butterfly very well, but in regards to the shape on his right side, I think that looks pretty good. I can't remember this particular rabbit's nose fork, but it looks pretty good. Ear base, that's pretty good. I'd like to see that color go down to the tip of the ear a little bit more, or the base of that ear a little bit more. I really like this, how symmetrical that cheek spot is. And then if you're looking at his patterns, there's some things to talk about it. This isn't the best quality picture, if you will, but the clarity of the spot markings is not there, and the graduation isn't there, in my opinion. There is some graduation, but it's not as clear. And he's a little empty in his sweep, if you will. So sweep coming out of the chain coming out of the shoulder down to the sweep, which is kind of over his rib cage. He's missing a few spots. Now, I wish I had the mirror image of this rabbit so we could talk about balance from side to side, but this gives you a kind of a cool profile of it. I couldn't find any videos to put up for us to see, but that's one way that we can evaluate them. And I've had lots of new breeders send me lots of videos to look at on regards to them. So those are my comments on that particular rabbit. If you have anything to go from there, by all means. This is a doe that Casey and I showed quite a bit. She was very successful on the show table. I think she had a half-sister that was even more successful. Her half-sister took multiple best in shows, significant shows, but this doe was one that I think we offered up, if I remember correctly from stealing pictures off of our Facebooks this afternoon. This is a doe that we sold. We retained her sister for breeding, who was very successful. This doe offers a little bit different presentation. She's really strong in that front end. Very similar in regards to it. She offers a notch longer length of overall body, very clean about that head. She might show a little bit more graduation and a little bit more distinction in those side markings. But again, as she comes out of the sleep into that hip, we get a little light on that overall pattern. Now, this is a doe that I would have shown and been very proud of breeding, but I'm just being critical in regards to the overall evaluation. Her herringbone for me could be a little bit more defined. It's a little smooth in my opinion based on this photo. I'd like to see a little better presentation of that. So a nice doe, but still some things that we can talk about. And there's that elbow spot. If you remember talking about it, you can see it on his front elbow. Go to the next one. Now here's a doe that instantly I don't like. This is a doe that I don't like because of her overwhelmingness of markings. And so we talk about, we talk about clustered pattern, or we talk about dirty size, or things like that. This doe is very congested in her side pattern, but she has really good color. Even through this picture, you can see the intensity of her chocolate color. She has intensity of marking, so they're very intense in regards to their presentation. You can see she carries, you can barely see her tail, but she carries that dark chocolate color in her herringbone all the way down to the base of the tail. She's got very bold markings. With that boldness comes a lot of congestion on that side pattern, but this could be a breeding piece. This still offers a really good front end. She's kind of twisted in this picture and not really looking, or not giving us a really good side profile, but you can see how strong she is in that front end, how strong those front ankles are on the overall length of body and that arch that comes through it. She might get a little flat over that rump, that lower 1/3, but still a solid body doe. Obviously, we just want to clean up those markings. She does show graduation. Her markings do get smaller to bigger as it moves through the pattern, but her congestion is the reason that this doe was up for sale. So we'll go to the next one. Here's a rabbit out of a doe. So we actually, I remember, I'm pretty sure, in case you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is a doe or a baby out of a doe that we bought at the Indiana convention. She was the best of variety black there. And this doe produced some really good stuff for us. This rabbit, pretty good profile. I like the front end structure. I like the head on it. I like how it comes out of that rib cage. For me, where she falls off is she gets a little flat over that loin, and she gets slightly angular in that lower 1/3. Rabbits, or excuse me, English spots are never going to have the hind quarter of a satin. Maybe some people will challenge me with that, but they're just not. They're not the same type of rabbit. You know, you can see the pin bones in this rabbit. We can still get more depth of loin and roundness over that hind quarter, and so I'm going to fault this doe on that. Pretty good front end. Her eye circles for me are a little ragged, and I'd like to see them a lot cleaner in that. Ear base is okay. She kind of has that one head spot that I consider to be in the ear base, but for me that's a distraction in regards to that. That's a very clear, dirty head base, if you can see it there at the base of the ear. Cheek spots are a little oblong for me. They're not as circular as I like to see them, not as clean in their overall presentation. She does show graduation, but she fails to exhibit a proper side marking to me. She's very straight in her overall presentation of that, comes out of the shoulder and goes right straight down to it. She fails to show that nice clean sweep and that lack of spots at the top of her hip marking, in my opinion. She's also very empty right in the center of her hip. Go to the next one. Here's another doe that shows, and right off the bat, in my opinion, she shows graduation very well. The size of the pattern, size of the markings goes, but this doe gets a little congested. Well, I shouldn't say a little, a lot congested over that hip marking, and shows some feathering in those patterns and intensity of chocolate color. She's got a pretty clean head in regards to it, but another doe that offers up some great qualities, but just, you know, you give and take in regards to your overall pattern. I believe that's a blue buck there in the bottom right corner. You can see his nose fork. I love his nose fork, but he gets for me a little squared off in his cheek spot, or excuse me, in his outside on his butterfly. But another really pretty, if I remember that buck correctly, he was a very, very good blue buck that we had in the barn. Okay. And then this is my favorite rabbit that I've ever bred, I think. So this doe was a great junior doe, and she won the 2010 English Spot National Show, or All English Spot National Show. I drove out myself with a carload of spots, and this doe was a heck of a little rabbit. She showed herself off extremely well, and she was one of my favorite. Her name was Hey Mouse, Ain't Got Mojo on Me. And she was a cool little rabbit. She obviously, she won her class, and she won the variety, and she wanted to win the breed, and she did an exceptional job at representing the breed. Grays are a little harder because of the coloration of their markings. They maybe are not as intense and don't show off as much. But this doe, she was a beautiful mover. She presented herself extremely well. She was clean-headed. I loved her ear base. I absolutely love this rabbit's front end. She showed a very good distinction of spots. This picture is, I think, a copy of a picture, so she's lacks a little bit of clarity in it. But I would like to see a little heavier markings, a little more distinct, rounder markings over that hip on this doe. This doe this year, this is 2010. I believe it was the Indianapolis convention. So this doe's mother was a high producer for me that year. This rabbit right here was born on January 1 of 2010, and then that doe came back and had another litter later in that spring that produced the best of variety gray at convention that year, which was this one's gray brother. And then we also took, which is the next rabbit, we took best of variety chocolate at the Indy convention that year. Unfortunately, we lost breed to a really pretty black buck from Canada, but we'll talk about that later. So this is one of my favorite does that I've ever produced, and I really enjoyed it. So then I think there's one more to look at. This doe was Hey Mouse, What You Looking At? And so she was another one of our really our favorite rabbits to show. She was so cool to watch on the table in regards to her overall presentation. She was a dynamite show doe, a good producer. She was best of variety at the Indy convention, and then she won multiple best of breeds, and I think she's got a reserve and show, and maybe even a best in show. Just a really cool rabbit. that we produced, and there's some things about her that I don't like either. She had a beautiful length of body. I loved her profile. I loved how smooth she was over that loin into the lower hindquarter. She got up and showed herself off. She's extremely strong in that front end. I loved her expression in her eye and how she moved down the table. Like, you can see her nose marking is a little, her nose fork is a little tilted off to one side, but for me, I wasn't going to falter that much, and a lot of the judges agreed. I like your air base. I would like to see it come down just a notch more, and then she maybe is a little more congested and lacks a little bit of clarity on her marking, on that side marking, but this doe, side to side, matched up probably one of the best out of all of the rabbits that Casey and I bred together. Just a really fun doe, really pretty doe to watch move, and she tied all of those things in together for me. She tied balance, she tied her body type, movement, overall presentation, and then she had a really cool spirit about her. So one of my favorite rabbits, probably my second favorite rabbit that we ever bred. So a whole bunch of things for you to look at in regards to, you know, the English spot breed, and there's a whole bunch. I mean, I could talk about them for hours in regards to evaluating them. Casey and I have had the opportunity to get a ton of new herds started throughout the country. If you look back into some of the pedigrees that are out there, you'll see Haymow Rabbitry throughout them. We really enjoyed our time in them. You know, when I was a kid, I took a chance and bought my first one from a lady named Robin here in central New York, and then I befriended a couple other old timer breeders that were into it, another gentleman named Walt, and they really kind of took me under my wing. But I can remember the first time I put English spot up on the best in show table as a youth, the rabbit barely got a look at it. And nowadays it's really cool to see judges are giving this breed the chance that they deserve. There's a lot of hard work that goes into making a good one, and understanding what a good one is the job of our judges. And I think that's something that we've done a really good job at in the ARBA and promoting the breed. And I would like to think Casey and I, you know, had a little bit of a say in getting the breed to be a little more popular. So there's a lot of great breeders out there that are taking them to new places. One of my favorites is Hannah out in Ohio, in your neck of the woods, and she's just done a great job for the breed and continues to promote them and do a wonderful job. And who knows, maybe someday I'll be back in the breed. So that's kind of my wrap up, but Terry, if there's questions or things that you want, by all means, I'd be happy to answer them.
All righty. Yeah, friends, please send in your questions if you have them. Amanda will read them off here shortly, and also chime in with where you're located at. I might ask one question to buy a little time since Facebook's just about 20 seconds behind. Corey, the gold variety, it seems like when I judge them a lot, you see a big range of colors and shadings on the gold. Would you mind touching on that for us just a moment?
Yeah, if you notice, I didn't say that I ever raised golds. The gold color is absolutely stunning. Hannah has done a very good job at them. I know Mike Ivesing has them. They've been out there. It's just a color that's a little hard, and how that color is presented is challenging at times, and depending on what's behind it in this color, it's like a red mini Rex, right? What's behind the red mini Rex? And so, you know, I think that we have to, you know, what is a gold in regards to its color and presentation? I've seen a lot of lilac torts, a lot of blue torts, a lot of chocolate torts try and come across my table as golds, and we have to make sure we understand them. Torts can only be shown as a black tort, and so if we take those tort rabbits and we start breeding them into other colors, blacks and blues or blacks that carry blue and lilac and dilute behind them, we're going to get some funky colors. Although they're beautiful, they're not accepted in the ARBA in regards to those, and oftentimes I see them come across the table as blues as golds when they're not. The gold color has their own variation. You see, in my opinion, you see a lot of frosty colored blues, and you see, frosty colored golds, but then you also see some more intense, more solid color, almost like a marigold color. Maybe not marigold, but marigold or mustard colored gold. And that's something that, you know, I've seen a lot that I like, but it's a color it takes a lot of work to get a good one. And then how they present the markings as well, because they're just not as bold in color. So I don't know if I answered your question. If you notice, I haven't raised golds, so there's a reason for that. So.
All righty, thank you. Amanda, do we have any comments or questions coming in?
We are just gonna chime in here and just say approximately where people have watched from. We've got some people that have chimed in saying that they're from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, another Pennsylvania, another Pennsylvania. We've got, looks like another Michigan, Ohio's are really coming in. There's another Indiana, there's a former Michigan breeder. And as far as questions go, we have, can you briefly explain the sweep again?
So on the side markings as it comes out of that, if we, I don't know if we can go back or not, but as those animals, as the side marking comes out, should come out of the neck is essentially where side marking, or the shoulder, right? And so they're starting to come down the chain comes down the side of the rabbits, and then they sweep, yeah, here we go. So this rabbit, maybe.
Well, once we, I'm sorry,
Yes.
just 1 second. Is there a certain one that you want?
You can do the first one, that's fine.
Okay.
So this rabbit here, so this is actually a good example. So as it's coming out, we start out of the nape of the neck or right behind the head on the shoulders. That's where we're coming out with a chain, and then the sweep. If you follow that pattern of this rabbit, it actually shows the pattern how it should go down and essentially sweep right underneath that rib cage, not down to the belly, but should sweep through that midsection. You don't want markings up by that loin or the herringbone through that, over that rib cage and down there. It should come from the shoulder, and then I'm pointing to it like you can see it, but it should come down into that middle of the rib cage and then kind of sweep up, if you will, into the hip marking. And so you don't want to be up by those, up by the spine marking. You want to get down below. So if you ever see me at a show and that doesn't make sense, just grab me and I'll show you.
Okay, Amanda, anything else?
I do not have anything, just besides comments saying that this is a great presentation, and we had.
So
one
I see one, I'm just looking back. It says, as a mom of a youth breeder, what advice do you have for them to be successful? And then that same individual, can you offer some tips for evaluating juniors? And so I think let's answer the first one first. So advice to be successful. Well, in anything, it takes hard work and dedication, right? And this is a breed that can be discouraging because of the number of things that go into it, right? We've got a breed that needs to be moving on the table and show fluidity of movement, and so soundness, proper structure, overall arching body type, and then we have to put a bunch of markings on it, right? And there's a lot, and we can have really good side markings and then really bad head markings. And so, and maybe mom doesn't want to hear this, but it's a numbers game, right? The more you produce, the more likelihood you're going to have of getting a good one. And so it comes down to a numbers game, and that's something we can talk about individually. And that's hard because you're getting a lower percentage of showable rabbits, right? You take a broken mini Rex and breed it to a solid mini Rex with the same color, and they're both good, you're going to have a higher percentage of potential show rabbits in that mini Rex litter. Whereas you take two really good spots, breed them together, you might only have 25% that are marked, and out of that 25%, maybe only 10% of them are show worthy. And so I think in order to be successful, you have to be diligent in your breeding program, and you have to, be persistent and make sure that you cull properly, that you evaluate them properly, and just try and stay positive and find the good in the rabbits as well as you're going through them. They're a wonderful breed, but they take a lot of work. To evaluate, we used to evaluate litters the minute they're born to kind of look at them. They don't have any hair on them. You can see those markings quite clearly, if you will. And then, patience and understanding of the breed and how they move, and making sure that you give them the table time they deserve in order to evaluate them properly. You're just, you're just harming yourself in your breeding program if you don't take those animals out beforehand and work them on the table, right? I know the rabbits and the concept of training them doesn't maybe seem like something that we talk about, but in order for them, I don't care if it's a mini Rex or New Zealand, Flemish Giant, anything, you've got to get them on the table and get them settled into learning how to be handled and touched and posed and things like that. And with a spot, they need to be touched, but they also need to learn how to run that table and show themselves off. So when it comes to juniors, I don't even really look at them the first time, or I didn't. Sure, we would look at them, don't get me wrong. Casey and I would point out the ones that we liked and the things that we thought, but we give them 1 or 2 or 3 times on the table before we started making those hard cuts and those decisions in regards to which ones were going to be retained for the breeding program or retained for the show program, or, you know, potentially being sold. And so, you know, and that takes time to do that. So that's kind of my advice in regards to looking at that. My son wants to know how old you were when you started with spots. Well, I'm only 21 now, so no, I'm just kidding. I started, I think I got my first spot when I was 10 from a lady named Robin. I was at a Mohawk show here in New York, and I bought it because it was pretty. And then I was like, I just fell in love with the breed. So, any other questions?
Well, there's not a question, but there's a comment that you've kind of not seen when you were, or at least commented on when you were looking through.
Yeah.
Someone says you got some nice hair.
So at least I'm not losing it. That's funny.
Sorry, I had to mention that one because, like, well, that's fun.
Yeah, I like my blonde hair.
Tell you, I'll do a little introducing some of our future workshops here, and maybe some other questions will chime in here before we're done here. KV friends, wink, wink. I told you the last time that KVs are making a comeback, and we've got them for not 1, but we've got them for 2 shows or 2 presentations next month. And I think we've got some awesome judges speaking on them. Starting off, July the 11th, this will be one of our rare Saturday workshops. It'll be July the 11th at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And we're going to Maryland for Judge Faith Storms. And she's going to be talking on preparing your KVs for show. And again, July 11th, 10 a.m., Faith Storm, preparing your KVs for show. Then 4 days later, on the 15th, we're going north of the border. Yes, we're going to go up and see Judge Mary Lou Eisel in Ontario. Mary Lou's been a judge, breeder, standards committee person, and I think she also played shortstop for the Toronto Blue Jays one year, but don't hold me to that. On July 15th, 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Judge Mary Lou Eisel, KVs, husbandry and nutrition. We had something like this for rabbits here recently, and I thought since we did that for rabbits, we better do it for KVs too. So Mary Lou's going to be joining us on husbandry and nutrition. And I'd just like to remind everybody, our D8 YouTube channel is called ARBA D8 website. And here in a few days, Amanda will have this video up on it, along with all of our other virtual workshops and a good selection of our live workshops from last fall. So please feel free to check it out. Amanda, has any other questions come in?
No, they have not. Not at least that I can see.
Okay. Hey, Corey, I want to thank you again. I really appreciate you giving us your time today and talking on this beautiful, beautiful breed. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And I do want to say, you know, this isn't something these judges have to do, but they're willing to give of their time and knowledge, and we definitely appreciate it. And these virtual workshops are kind of taking the place of our live events until, you know, things get back to normal. On a side note, I'd like to remind everybody, if you haven't checked it out, recently ARBA President Josh Humphreys put a video out on the ARBA site talking about our updated RHD policies in the ARBA. If you haven't seen that, please take a few moments to check it out. Some very good information. Also check back constantly to the ARBA page. And of course, we share it here on District 8 as things happen on the RHD scene. We share them here too. So please, this is something we're trying to keep you updated on. So check back regularly. Before we go, I want to give you some thank y'alls. Of course, I already said thank you to Corey for his awesome job tonight. I want to thank my YouTube, my web team here, Amanda Behe, that's at the Control Center. She's a busy, busy person doing all of this in addition to her 4-H duties. So we want to say thank you, Amanda. Also, we take a little look up into Michigan. We see Jane Burt. Not only is she the District 8 webmaster and the newsletter editor, but she puts out our promotional flyers for these live events. So we say thank you to Jane and Amanda. And also we want to thank our viewers for joining in, spending your time with us. Y'all are the reason that we do these. One more time, Amanda, any other questions?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, with that, again, thank you, Corey. Thank you, everybody. And we hope to see you back here on July the 11th to watch Face Storms. With that, stay safe, my friends, and see you then. Bye-bye.